Second and last panel here at the Plaza de la Virreina. We will now have the speakers on stage. I will introduce them to you. I just wanted to tell you that all of the activities, all of the events you are witnessing here, if you like them, you can attend all other events because we have 7 days of a frenzy of events. There's so many panels and lectures. There is this hand program, but also the information is available at the website of the BIENNAL del PENSAMENT. This third edition, by the way, is not just held in Barcelona this year, but also in Valencia and Palma. So we are starting to expand to other cities. The conference now will be in English and Spanish, and you have translation service to English or Catalan. And now it's a good time to get your headsets. So this panel is called New Digital Rights, how to guarantee human rights in a connected society. We want to reflect on the possibility of reformulating the Charter of Human Rights because of this technology. What are the new questions that emerge with the new technological advances or artificial intelligence? We will be discussing that. With whom? Well, we will start with Genser. He's Secretary and CEO of Neural Rights Foundation, amongst other positions. Then we also have Nnenna Nwakanma. She's an advocate of accessibility to internet and one of the 100 most influential people in the world in terms of digital governance. Then we have the facilitator of this panel, Sabater, Director of the Department for Ethics Observation in the University of Catalonia. And then we have Valdivia. She's a professor in AI governance and politics at the Oxford Internet Institute. And last, we've got Ricardo Baeza-Yates, and he is the director of the Institute for Experiential AI at the Northeastern University in the United States. As always, we will have 10-15 minutes at the end of the panel so that you can also ask your questions and we will forward them to our guest. So whenever you want. Thank you very much, Laura. It is a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. As you can see, we've got a brilliant panel here with many things to say about new digital rights and a situation which is increasingly influential for each one of us, which is being connected permanently in a global society in which doubts emerge as to whether there is constant surveillance. Also, doubts emerge in terms of our rights related to digital health. Also doubts as to whether the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the UN Declaration is good enough to tackle the challenges posed by this new situation, this new scenario of permanent connectivity. And what I will do is I will give the floor first to Jared, and Genser. He will tell us about, he will be speaking about things mostly related to rights, okay? So we will have a first presentation by Jared, then we will have Nnenna Nwakanma, and last we will have a number of discussions in which Valdivia to my left and Ricardo Baeza-Yates will also be participating. So without further ado, Jared, Genser, you're on.
Well, thank you so much, and good to be with all of you here today. My name is Jared Genser. I'm an international human rights lawyer and general counsel to the Neural Rights Foundation, which is a U.S. nonprofit organization whose mission is to promote innovation, protect human rights, and ensure...
Can you give 1 minute for people to put on their headset?
Yeah. For anyone who needs to put on headsets. So our foundation is focused on promoting innovation, protecting human rights, and ensuring the ethical development of neurotechnology. On this panel today, we're going to talk about this from many different perspectives of digital rights. I'm focusing more narrowly on emerging neurotechnology specifically. Our board chair is Dr. Rafael Yuste, who is an MD, PhD at Columbia University, who runs their neurotechnology lab. He is the expert on the science, and I'm the expert on the human rights side, which is why we make a good team. When I first met Rafael, I learned about fast-moving developments in science and as it relates to neurotechnology, and realized that the world has no idea what is coming and is totally unprepared to address potential misuse or abuse of this technology. In my brief remarks, I'll first describe a little bit about what neurotechnology is and how it's already been deployed in terms of current use and potential misuse or abuse. Then I'll describe briefly why this technology is accelerating so rapidly. And then lastly, I'll talk about developments at the United Nations and in the global and legal regulatory environment, where we may start to look at putting in place human rights protections as this technology becomes much more widespread and accessible. So first, what is neurotechnology? It's the set of methods and instruments that allow a direct connection between technical devices and the nervous system. At the heart of neurotechnology are what are referred to as brain-computer interfaces, BCIs. These are devices that connect a person's brain to a computer or another device outside the human body, like a smartphone or a computer. BCIs allow bidirectional communication between the brain and the outside world, exporting brain data or altering brain activity. And there are two kinds of brain-computer interfaces. They can either be invasive, meaning implanted with surgery into a person's skull, or non-invasive, like a helmet worn over your head. The brain is the source of all human mental and cognitive processes, imagination, perception, and memory. And because it directly interacts with the brain, neurotechnology may well even alter profoundly what it means to be human. Examples of the best-known current applications of neurotechnology include cochlear implants for deafness and spinal cord stimulators to treat Parkinson's disease. But there are other extraordinary developments that have attracted far less attention. For example, mind-reading technology is now science and no longer science fiction. Last year, a person who was paralyzed and nonverbal with an implantable brain-computer interface is now able to communicate at 18 words a minute with up to 94% accuracy. A person who was quadriplegic wore a BCI helmet to drive a Formula One race car, and a person who was paraplegic wore a helmet to make the first kick of the World Cup several years ago using a mind-controlled robotic exoskeleton. And in the realm of computer products, Control Labs has developed a wristband for consumers that enables you to control your cursor on a screen with your mind. In addition, Kernel Flow's wearable helmet can now map brain activity with unparalleled accuracy. But we've also seen some initial misuse and abuse of this technology. For example, in China, using a brain-computer interface from the company BrainCo, which monitors, has a monitoring device that determines whether a person is concentrating. Several Chinese schools ran a pilot program where teachers in the classroom were monitoring in real time if students were concentrating. Red meant they were not concentrating, the light on their helmet. Green meant that they were concentrating. At a factory in Hangzhou, China, production line workers have been outfitted with a brain-computer interface hat that can read brain signals to decode workers' emotions, and then this data is fed into artificial intelligence algorithms to detect changes in emotion which affect productivity levels. But the misuse and abuse of these kinds of technologies could take place even in democratic societies. For example, BCIs might one day be able to be used by law enforcement on criminal suspects. And the question is going to be, how would that be permissible, and what civil liberties might protect against these kinds of uses? Today, only a small amount of brain data can be meaningfully interpreted, but in the future, as the technology evolves, non-invasive neurotechnology, hats or helmets, as I've described, hand in hand with artificial intelligence algorithms, could read a lot more information about a person's mental state or processes. In short, this kind of technology is replete with potential human rights violations. Because the brain is the site of our human memory, perception, and personality, these kinds of devices pose a challenge not only for our privacy, but even for our sense of self and for free will. As often happens with neurotechnology, with new technologies, the development of neurotechnology has far outpaced the very limited efforts to regulate it. While invasive brain-computer interfaces are heavily regulated under the domain of medicine, non-invasive BCIs, which are used for similar purposes, like a hat or helmet, are generally totally unregulated. So why is neurotechnology now advancing so quickly? In short, there's been a massive amount of global development and investment in neurotechnology going back to 2013 when President Obama launched his BRAIN initiative, which is a multi-billion-dollar program over many years involving the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and the Department of Defense in the United States. Since 2013, 5 other BRAIN initiatives have been created around the world, including the European BRAIN Project, and China's BRAIN Project, announced in 2016, is investing $1 billion annually into the development of neurotechnology through the year 2030. Sources report an increase of 62% in global neurotechnology development just between 2019 and 2020, and the global neurotechnology market, today valued at about $10 billion, is expected to reach $21 billion annually by 2026. This has also led to a wide array of companies being created that are patenting their technology, with at this point some 2,500 patents annually being issued around the world, mostly awarded to private inventors that are not part of medical device companies. So now let me just lastly talk about the global legal and regulatory environment and how are we hopefully going to be able to protect our human rights. In 2017, the Morningside Group, which is a group of 25 experts led by my colleague Raphael Yuste, who I mentioned before, identified 5 neuro rights to describe how current and future neurotechnology might violate human rights. These include the need for a right to mental identity or a sense of self, the right to mental agency or free will, the right to mental privacy, the right to fair access to mental augmentation, and the right to be protected from algorithmic bias, such as when neurotechnology is combined with artificial intelligence. By protecting neuro rights, as we've referred to them, societies can maximize the benefits of BCIs and prevent the misuse or abuse of these technologies. These emerging neuro rights will need to be protected at the international level, the national level, by companies, and also by educating individual citizens around the world. And I'll address each of these areas briefly in turn. Starting with the United Nations, it is worth looking at a wide array of ways in which the United Nations can get involved in these kinds of issues. Our foundation has already been working with the Office of the UN Secretary General, which has already convened 2 private roundtables with a wide array of stakeholders to discuss how the UN should be looking at these issues on a system-wide basis. Coming from these discussions, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, in his strategic plan for his second term in office, called Our Common Agenda, explicitly mentioned that we need to examine the human rights implications of digital technologies and neurotechnology in particular. Just last week, the United Nations Human Rights Council, which is comprised of 47 member states of the UN, adopted a first ever resolution on neurotechnology and human rights and commissioned its advisory committee to conduct a first ever study at the United Nations on this topic. This past May, our foundation published the first ever gap analysis looking at existing international human rights treaties to see where the potential for misuse or abuse might already be prohibited, where the interpretation of these treaties might be expanded to incorporate protections for neuro rights, and where there are gaps that might need to be fulfilled. To explain this in a little further detail, it's worth noting that there are a lot of treaties that might already prohibit misuse or abuse of neurotechnology. For example, the application of a brain-computer interface now or in the future that could inflict physical or psychological harm on a person wearing it would already be prohibited under the Convention Against Torture. But in other contexts, the interpretation of treaties might need to be expanded, as these are treaties that were adopted decades ago and didn't consider the potential misuse or abuse of new technologies. Take, for example, the right to freedom of thought and conscience under a treaty called the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. That treaty's been interpreted to prohibit arbitrary interference with a person's thought or conscience. But one of the proposed neuro rights that I mentioned is a right of mental privacy. And if one day it might be possible to monitor a person's thoughts in the future with a wearable brain-computer interface, which is expected may be possible within about a 5 to 7 year time horizon, then simply by monitoring a person's thoughts, that wouldn't necessarily be a violation of the treaty as it was interpreted. And as a result, the body that interprets that treaty might want to create or amend what's called a general comment that interprets what the treaty means, and to say that it's, of course, and should be, a violation of a right of, a right to freedom of thought and conscience to passively monitor a person's thoughts. Even the passive monitoring should be prohibited, and that should never be allowed except with the person's informed consent. If that kind of a change were made to an interpretation of the treaty, it would then be required for the 175 countries in the world, which cover 92% of the world's population, to create a domestic right of mental privacy in their own national law. And so this is one way that we're looking at accelerating a process of protecting neuro rights. Beyond those efforts underway at the UN, there are also regional efforts underway in various bodies around the world. But again, these are very nascent and very much at the beginning stages. I think where it's going to matter the most in terms of where these kinds of technologies will interface with consumers, of course, is at the national level. And the rise of consumer neurotechnology in particular emphasizes the need for laws and regulations that reflect how rapidly it is advancing. In the US, Spain, around the world, there are a lot of BCIs already available, about 15 to 20 consumer products available that are wearable helmets and headbands that are already marketed to consumers with claims of enhancing their support for meditation and wellness, improving learning efficiency, or enhancing brain health. But unlike implantable devices where you need a surgery to put something into a person's brain, where those are heavily regulated as medical devices, these kinds of wellness devices are consumer products and are subject to literally no regulations whatsoever. And consumers may be unaware of the way in which these devices might infringe on their human rights and privacy rights. For example, the data that consumer neurotechnology products collect could be insecurely stored or sold to third parties. User agreements are long and technical and have concerning provisions in them that allow companies to indefinitely keep a user's brain scans and to sell them to third parties without informed consent that could protect a person's human rights. As I noted before, today it's possible to interpret only some of a brain scan, but that's going to increase dramatically over time. Our organization has partnered with a U.S. consumer advocacy organization, Consumer Reports, and we're working on a first ever issue that will focus not only on evaluating consumer neurotech products and how they work and function and how they function relative to their cost, but also assessing each product about the extent to which its user agreements meet human rights and privacy rights standards. We hope that the publishing of this report and taking this report global will focus the attention of policymakers in Washington and Madrid around the world on the need to at least adopt a minimum set of neuro rights protections into law. Here in Spain, your president has proposed a digital rights charter which describes 6 new rights for the digital age. While these are helpful, the charter is neither new legislation nor regulation, but only a framework of reference for Spanish authorities to inform future action. In our view, another important step forward will need to be the development of a global code of conduct for companies and investors, which would help create standards for collection, storage, and sale of brain data. For instance, making the privacy of brain data an opt-out default. In other words, unless you say yes, automatically your brain data cannot be transferred to a third party, would help protect users' informed consent by letting them decide when their brain activity is monitored. And
1 minute.
yeah. I would also think that industry by industry, there'll be a need for these kinds of self-governing principles that need to be tailored to each industry's connection with neurotechnology. Finally, there needs to be wider education of the global population at large, both about the extraordinary advances in neurotechnology globally, which will have enormous positive medical, economic, and societal impact, but also how the risks can be mitigated. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Toronto with a renowned documentary filmmaker, Werner Herzog, who just launched his newest film, Theater of Thought, which we were involved in helping to create and present. And that documentary film begins to address the kinds of issues that we're discussing here today. Ultimately, effective multilateral cooperation, national action, industry engagement, and citizen education are all needed to advance the adoption of neuro rights and close protection gaps under international human rights law. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Jared. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jared. As you can see and as you can witness, we talk about rights, and we talk about rights, which is the model of prediction. We want to anticipate everything. We want to know everything beforehand through technological devices, right? We need to get the information not only through smartphones, but through many other sophisticated items and devices that will allow us, we want to see the future that will have an impact, right? We talked about privacy here, that will have a very important impact against people's privacy. So the thoughts that we can have will have an implication in the future, right? So now we'll give the floor to Nnenna, right? And she's going to share with us what are the existing relationships between what we've said we witnessed through Jared's presentations, but also the social perspective, mainly through the lenses of inequalities, from a perspective that we don't know.
Barcelona.
Hello, Barcelona.
That was the scientific part. I will speak slowly, and I will make you laugh. You see this lady in the second row? You were here at 5 o'clock. Thank you very much. There is another two friends, the lady in red with her friend in glasses. You came on time. You stayed in the last session, and you're here again. Who are the people who were here in the last session? I love you. Thank you very much for being here and being part of this program. Second group of people, you see that gentleman over there? He's hitting it. He's doing French and English translators. Thank you very much. I will speak about 7 things, and I will speak gently. Who knows the very first article in the Declaration of Human Rights? Do you remember? You don't need to be a lawyer. All humans beings are born equal. They are born free and equal in rights and in dignity. Do you remember? If you forget every other thing today, remember that. All human beings are born equal, are born free and equal in rights and in dignity. Even if I don't speak, remember. Okay? That is the basis of what we want to talk about today. Human rights were before digital rights. I work for the World Wide Web Foundation. It is the foundation that is started by the inventor of the web. So when you type www, that's me. And that's why they call me Nnenna from the internet. You get that? Can we go ahead? So, number 1, all human beings were born free and equal in rights and in dignity. It is that principle that we bring to digitalization. It is really very important. When Sir Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web, he followed the vision of the inventors of the internet. You see, the internet that we use to make machines communicate with machines, some people invented it, and they did not keep it to themselves. They shared it with all of humanity, and they believed that all tech should support human rights. That is the reason the internet is free. You don't need to do any particular thing to connect to the internet. Whether you are in Africa, you are in Asia, whether you are a Real Madrid fan or a Barcelona fan, you are welcome. Okay? So the inventors of the internet, the inventors of the World Wide Web, the people who keep working on this, believed that technology should support human rights. At the Web Foundation, we say for everyone. For everyone. So let's remember, the first thing, we are born free and equal. The second thing, technology should support freedom and equality. Now, there is a problem. When you are creating technology, when you are making laws for technology, do you remember this principle? You need to think of it. Because technology regulation, technology creation should all work together to ensure that liberty and equality are sustained. That is number 3. Now, what we know, in the field of technology, there are those who write code that helps the brain think and speak through appliances. There are those who write the laws. There are those who create content. The previous panel called them stakeholders, but maybe we can call them actors. Who has a cell phone here? Are you on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, everyone, WhatsApp, and all of those? So you create content. You are like me. We take photos, we share them. We write blogs, we share them. We create images, we share them. How many of you are in the press? Journalists. Okay. So there is the group of users. We call them content creators. There is the group of technology and designers. We call them code makers. And there is the group of governments and lawmakers. We call them policy creators. The biggest challenge we have is in making the people who do law understand the people who do code and understand the people who do content. That is the biggest challenge in digital rights. Now, I'm going to ask you one question. If you found a technology that is good for you, but not good for your aged parents, would you love it? If you found a technology that is not accessible to you, would you love it? The question, Mr. Moderator, now becomes, the regulations and the digital rights that we have today, are they made in such a way that technology makes people free, makes them equal in rights and in dignity? I will speak of one thing, data privacy, or privacy and security online. Our research has shown that 41% of parliamentarians, lawmakers in Sweden, have had altered images of themselves sent to them. There is huge abuse online. So what people do, they take a photo of you and they add the head of a dog or something like that, or they take your head, they add to a naked body and they send to you. women are very much under abuse. Jared talked about use and abuse of technology. We have to be very careful about it. In Chile, in South America, 71% of the women have had abusive messages on Twitter. Our research shows that women in politics and women in journalism face a lot of attack everywhere in the world, even in Spain. And what is happening is that instead of these people, did you remember the two groups? Women in politics, women in journalism. And these are the two who carry law and content. So what is happening is that abuse online is making those women to keep their mouths shut. Abuse and violence online is making those women disconnect from different platforms. Is this a world that we want? That is my question to you. I'm going to end, while you are still thinking, by asking you, what can you do? The last session talked about solidarity. And the speaker was saying, we can love people from a distance, we can help them, but solidarity is better when it is reciprocal. In terms of digital, your security is dependent on my security. And so we have to be in solidarity with each other. At the global level, he talked about our common agenda. I am working with the Office of the UN Tech Envoy to adopt a global digital compact. Global digital compact. It's a set of agreements that will help us globally to address some of the issues that we've talked about: connectivity, misleading information, AI, and like extreme technology, if I might use the AI, or data privacy as well. About 7 pillars. So please check Global Digital Compact. I will tweet the link this evening, but if you go on my profile, you will see the link there. You can contribute. You can tell the UN. Your government will also contribute. That is on a global level. On a national level, here in Spain, I actually know Spain. I've gone on a train from Malaga to Zaragoza and here. And I've gone around this country. We need to continue to ask ourselves, when we make laws, are we making it for the market? Jared talked about 21 billion very soon in neurotech alone. You need to ask yourself, the laws you make, are they for the market? Are they for the citizens? I'm from Africa. I live in Costa de Marfil, Côte d'Ivoire. In Africa, most countries make laws to support the president and his party. Somehow in the US, laws are made to support the market. Did you know what happened in London over the weekend, this week? The market kicked the minister out. So are we making laws for the market? What happens in Spain, I don't know. But in Europe, sometimes they make laws to appease citizens who are manifesting on the streets. The laws are not for everybody. Once you can scream and shout, the government will make a law to suit you. That is not for everyone. In some other places, they make laws for the state, for the system, in Russia and in China and in some other places. Do we need new laws? Yes. But not so much in new laws but the way we apply existing laws. Do you remember what we said again? Whether we are making laws or applying laws, we must remember that all humans, we are born free and equal in rights and in dignity. My name is Nnenna. I come from the internet, and it's wonderful being with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nnenna. It was a pleasure to listen to your talk. Como podéis ver, ya tenemos muchos temas.
Well, many things on the table. We talk about rights, about privacy, we talk about inequalities, not only in the internet, but also how inequalities are shown and expressed through the real reality outside the internet. And now Olivia is going to talk about some of the details that we listened, but also her perspective from algo rights, not only a gender dimension, not only a dimension of inequalities, like an abstract perspective. For sure, it has a lot to do with inequalities that many people suffer, people that are at the margin of society, such as migrants, the people without papers, and many other people that really suffer the fact of not being able to have access to the internet. Anna, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I come from Algored. It is an organization that was created a few months ago here in Spain, and we are created a new awareness towards civil society, how to use AI, and how this technology it is used to oppress certain communities that historically were always oppressed. So thank you very much to the two of you, the previous speakers. What a great ideas you offered. Very fruitful conversation. After listening to you, it came to my mind a subject that I'd like to share with you, and it has to do with the climate emergency. We talk about human rights, we talk about digital rights. So the first question that I'd like to translate to these two keynote speakers, it is, where do you place the climate emergency inside the digital rights? Also in neurotechnology and in the internet rights as well, and how technology is having a negative impact on this climate emergency. And every time we use the cell phone, it's not for free. We need raw materials that come from mines from Chile and many other countries. These data are processed in data centers. We need huge amounts of water to refrigerate the infrastructures, data infrastructure, and once the technology is useless, we throw it away. And we throw it away in countries such as, well, in Africa, right? So we don't want this waste, and usually we send it to Africa. So this would be my first question. Where do you place the climate emergency inside this discussion and debate? You know, well, you can think about this. You can think about your answer to have some time. But let me tell you something. A question that to me it is fundamental has a lot to do not only with the fact that people have access to the internet to empower themselves and to have some rights, but also what are the rights of the people when they use, or maybe when they abuse from technologies, the internet, but also the devices, the hardware. So what really supposes for these fundamental rights such as dignity and equality for those people that live in countries where we get these raw materials to produce this hardware, and you talked about Chile. You talk about Chile. And in our amazing panel, we have Ricardo from Chile. So I'd like to offer him the floor. I want you to know what's your perspective and your approach while they think about the answers. And you, Ricardo, think about the questions that we are throwing here. Well, do you have more questions? Yes, I do have more questions. I do have more questions. Ricardo, if you don't mind, let's give the floor to Ricardo and we'll back to you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. I have a huge question, but it's a final question. So I'd like to offer some ideas like Nnenna did. and broaden the context. I think that the context when we use technology, it's very important. What is the context when we use technology? I think that it was in 2011, if I'm not wrong, the United Nations said that the internet, it is a universal right. However, today we have 3 billion people that do not have access to the internet. So this universal right, it's not universal at all. But they want to strengthen this idea, and I will talk about it later at the end of my talk. 3 billion people that do not have access to the internet, they have something that you don't have, that I don't have myself neither. Privacy. So they have this human right that we don't have. They have a private life. They are not controlled, neither with devices and cell phones. But the rest of the population, they have cell phones and smartphones. So, well, they give loads of data to know what they do, but it's not like us, that we are always connected to the internet. Let me just make a technical comment with this regard. The internet was invented 20 years before that World Wide Web, and people, they do not understand the difference between the internet and the World Wide Web. The internet, it is the communication network that we use to show what really happens in the internet, but the World Wide Web is the content platform and many other services that allow us to use the internet in a massive scale, and it is the biggest public repository that human beings created. But this happened 20 years before, when Timothy invented the internet, and we don't understand what's the internet, World Wide Web. People talk about the internet and we talk about the web in reality. So this is important, right? The second thing that is more important you can recall to us, it is the next idea. So if we have 3 billion people that do not have access to the internet, the first digital right, and maybe this could seem a contradiction, it is the right of not being digital. The right of an elderly person, well, to have access to a service. This happens in many countries. It is the right for someone not to use internet to have access to the government services. It is the right of an individual to live with all the human rights that Nnenna said in his own country. And this right, it's not written anywhere. It is the right of not having to be connected to the internet. I'd love not to be connected to the internet, but today it's almost impossible. Living without the internet, it's almost impossible. And I'd like to be kind of a neuroscientist, because here there are things that people do not know. There are some IT people that do not know this. The brain, in an evolution manner, well, evolved in such a way to better manage our body. We are animals. This is what all the animals experience. The thought, we talk about this thought, it is a product being more efficient when we manage our body in a better manner, with less power. So we didn't need loads of food. We were able to keep our body alive, and the rest of the time, what do? We think. But it's a lower product. We are not made to think. So we are here just by chance, because we are the animals that, well, we made these things better, but many other animals behind, such as dolphins, whales, and primates, octopus, and many others, they also have this thought. So we cannot separate the brain from the body. It's nonsense to talk about the right of the brains. When we talk about mental privacy, okay, the rights at the beginning of the United Nations, they talk about the privacy. The brain belongs to the human being. It's nonsense to separate body organs, so it's not good to legislate about neuro rights, so I do not agree with you. And finally, the last thing has to do with 10 days ago, we talked about the AI. These are not individual rights. They are instrumental principles such as data privacy, how to go against a decision, and also to have some security, to have better systems. Because what is happening today when we create these principles, it is that we are creating some redundant and less consistency, less consensus. And in the end, the most important thing that we have to do, first of all, it is to respect human rights that we have today. So we are born in equal and free. But in theory, because today, well, we are not free. If you are born in Africa, well, it doesn't depend on you. You will have a worse life than if you're born in Europe. Thank you.
Perdón, y la pregunta.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. And a question, a very short one. Do we really need to do anything else for human rights? I don't think so. Yes, that's a question for you all. But Anna had other questions, and there was also a reflection on the context. Go ahead, Anna. Yes, I was also wondering. I was, challenging the topic of human rights, coming up with genealogy of human rights, and know who actually reflected on them, who gave the human rights, and it was the West. But where are the indigenous peoples and other perspectives of understanding human rights? It was the West who formulated human rights. So that was another question I wanted to ask you. Just to give you an example, the European Union is violating a fundamental human right, which is the free movement of people. There's a regulation called the Dublin regulation, and any asylum applicants that get to the EU are taken the fingerprints processed by AI, and they have to stay in that country. If someone comes in a boat to Spain and applies for asylum, he or she cannot travel to France even if they have a cousin there, a relative. So that's a flagrant violation of human rights in this context, right? Thank you so much, Anna. So let's do this. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the first interventions with some of these questions, and we will have a first round so that they can also reply. But then we will go back to these questions in terms of reflections. If you were wondering to what extent the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is biased by whom made it, but also because of the context, Ricardo, I would like to know also how things are seen from different contexts, not from a legislative point of view, but from a moral or ethical perspective. So, Jared, Nnenna.
Any answers to some of the questions already put forward?
Sure. Well, I can provide some clarity on the evolution of human rights. Undoubtedly, the Universal Declaration was highly informed by the West, but actually did draw from much broader cultural traditions. The West tends to view human rights as individual rights, right, where non-Western countries are much more focused on community and collective rights. And if you look at human rights in the 21st century, for example, one of the treaties that was signed and ratified is the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which talks about a right to food, a right to education, right? These are collective rights and community rights, not just merely individual civil and political rights. So if you look even at the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights that I was mentioning earlier, even if it might have originated from a more Western conception of individual rights, today there are 177 countries in the world out of 193 that have signed and ratified that treaty and said, we sign on to this conception. And you have sitting on the treaty body that interprets that treaty, people from all around the world and from all cultural traditions, from the 7 regions of the world, all involved in interpreting that treaty as well. So I think that undoubtedly, if you look at the Universal Declaration and the membership of the UN in 1948, it was strongly Western-oriented, but a lot has happened in 75 plus years that have universalized human rights beyond just simply a Western conception of it. And human rights have been embraced by regional bodies like the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which has its own Charter of Rights at a regional level, the Inter-American Commission and Court of Human Rights, which looks at human rights from a regional level in Latin America. So I would say that we're, undoubtedly the origins of some of the initial civil and political rights were strongly Western, but we're now in a totally different world and in a much more interconnected, multicultural, and multi-religious world that we live in.
Right.
Nnenna,
Thank you, Jared. I think he spoke well of the human rights. I will speak to the global climate emergency. Anyone here has been to India? Anyone here has been to Delhi? Okay. If you've been to Delhi, you know how it can get dusty. During COVID, when we were on lockdown, people in Delhi saw the stars because we were all inside, we were working remotely, the cars were parked, and a lot of the pollution went down. Everybody saw that. I'm sure you've seen the photos of Delhi before COVID and during COVID, and now that people are coming out, we are back to pollution. I said my name is Nnenna, I come from the internet. My office is in Washington, but I live in Côte d'Ivoire, in West Africa. So before the pandemic, I was already working online. I've been working remotely for 17 years before COVID. So this is my 20th year of working online. The connection between climate and technology and digital is that most of the things we spend energy on, we could do them online. You recall when they told you, no, you have to come to the office. If you don't come, it won't get done. You have to, and then you are running in traffic. You are doing the same thing now, but at least you know you can do most of these things online and reduce your carbon imprint. So my answer is, there is so much we can do with technology to reduce the harm on the environment. There is something called the global commons. That is where that's a technical word for my sustainability depends on your sustainability, and your sustainability depends on his, and we are connected. The environment is like that, and the digital is also like that. The affirmation that access to the internet is a right is not yet universal. Frank LaRue, who most of you might have heard of, was the UN rapporteur on freedom of expression. I helped write the report that he sent to the Human Rights Commission and then sent to the office of the United Nations Secretary General. That report said that because access to the internet is a driver for all other human rights, it is only good that the United Nations should endorse access to the internet as a human right, because it is the driver to all other human rights. But there is no law, there is no acceptance to it. So there is no treaty to it. And I'm still fighting for it. That is one of the things I work on. Please tell the UN to make access to the internet a human right. Go to the office of the UN Tech Envoy, write it down, put down your name, sign it. If more than 1,000 of us do it, maybe we will get somewhere. Do it, ask your friend to do it. Carlos, you talked about something very interesting to me, the right not to be connected. So you see, when I came here, I have my phone. Everyone's got their phone. So the news, people, is that they're not being connected when you can be connected is the new posh. That's new luxury. How many of you have a private jet? Oh, people are poor here. So listen, I have to be online because I work online. I told you, right? I have to check in online. I have more than 200 apps on my phone. I have my bank. I have my movement. I have my children's school. I have everything to monitor on my phone online. I mean, everyone uses Google Maps, right? I went to Sagrada Familia, and they said you can't buy a ticket on the spot. You have to go online to buy a ticket. So here is the deal. If you in Barcelona can afford not to be online, baby, talk to me. You're a rich person. It means someone is going to do your shopping, someone is going to do your banking, someone is going to do your schooling, someone is going to do your ticketing for your flight, someone is going to check in for you. You just step out and step into a private jet. That is the new luxury, baby.
Muchas gracias. Como podéis ver, la cosa.
Well, thank you very much. Things are heating up from a digital perspective, if you see what I mean. And one of the things that are being discussed after Jared's intervention is an issue of applicability, I mean, of enforceability. I mean, we can have rights, but if they are not enforced, then they are not valuable, and especially when we're talking about the new rights. So, as for Nnenna, of course, she's very much in favor of everyone being connected, as you can see, not just in Barcelona, but around the world, because, of course, she is working on the World Wide Web, and that's her job. But that has implications, of course, as Anna said. I don't know if Anna and Ricardo have anything to say, mainly about the last words. I think it's very much the case. We should discuss this. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the mention to Chile. I did not know about this piece of statistics. I guess it's quite the same in most countries. I would also like to answer what Anna said about sustainability. I'm going to make up a number, but I guess the number is going to be very little. 99% of what we do on the internet is worthless. It's not productive for the rest of the world. It does not produce welfare, well-being. So we are misusing the resources we've got, power, the internet, and so on. That's the first thing I would say. Secondly, we have this obsession on the proposal, with the proposal by the EU on April 21st last year to regulate the use of technology. But the use of technology depends on the context, of course. Something that can be negative in a context, such as using a hammer, could be, of course, positive and productive in a different context. So you don't have to regulate the use of technology. I don't think that's a good idea. For instance, the law on privacy and data protection in Europe regulates a problem. We have to regulate the problems, such as medications or food or air travel. All of that is regulated, but that's not the problem, regardless of what technology we use to do that, because otherwise in the future we will have to regulate quantum physics or blockchain or whatever we come up with in the future, and we will have more laws that will create more redundancy, more inconsistencies, and lack of agreement between cultures, as Albert said. The visions from the US, Europe, or China are completely different on these issues. And I would like to end this reflection with my memory. Just one more thing. Yes, by the way, Anna is going to say, yes, I got it. It came to my mind. I just want to tell you about this example I lived. I witnessed in first person to the right and not being connected, and it happened to a Canadian and also to an African, it could be. He was in this in the airport here in Barcelona. I was in the airport in Barcelona. I was checking in my luggage for a flight to London, and I saw this Canadian lady, 70-something, and she was being told that she should fill in the COVID form required by the Canadian government online, or she could not travel. And the lady did not have a smartphone. So I took some time. I even found a mistake in the form, and I spent 15 minutes to fill in the form for this lady. And eventually she could travel to London, and I hope she could then travel to Canada, because she got help from someone else. She had to go through London, and she also asked that I would help his brother that was coming in afterwards. They were also 70-something, and they had been traveling on a cruise in the Mediterranean. They were quite bold, and luckily one of them, she had a cell phone, almost without battery, but I could do it in my phone. And I found out that in order to fill in the form, I had to erase the previous one from another person, and I could take a picture of that so they could travel to Canada. Why? Because there was no way to do it otherwise. And I think that's the problem. Just imagine in other countries and other situations, I have the right to buy a ticket for Sagrada Familia. If I don't have a smartphone, I still have the right. Well, yes, I guess everyone have heard when they say, just call or make an appointment through the internet to be to have a visit, on-site visit. Also with some public service companies, organizations, or phone companies, and you clash with this situation in which you have to make the appointment online, the physical appointment, the on-site appointment, you have to make it online as well. So I'm thinking about these questions on the enforceability of the legislation, on the permanent connectivity, privacy context, inequalities emerging in terms of design and outcome. But Anna, you've got things to say, right? Yes, I think this is a very interesting debate on the right to not being connected, to not being digitalized. And in this debate, I believe we need to take into account the privilege. Of course, it's not the same to have the privilege to take a flight, and that for that you need a mobile phone, or needing a mobile phone because otherwise you cannot apply for asylum, right? So privilege is a very significant factor in this debate, and we need to realize how these digital rights go through each one of the privileges we've got. And I would also like to add something to what Nnenna said on whether we need new laws. I guess many of you here know that the European Union is organizing, is making up this new charter of laws to regulate artificial intelligence. This is an unprecedented charter because it's the first time ever that AI is going to be regulated. But of course, you can trick that, you can cheat it, because if we review this regulation, there's Article 83 that says that all AI technology to be implemented for migration purposes is going to be considered high risks. This is great because all companies developing AI biometric systems to control migration flows are going to it's going to be harder for them. But of course they can cheat this because there's Article 83 in which the EU says, however, all biometric databases we, the EU, are implementing to control migration are exempt from this regulation. So I'm putting forward this question. Do we really need more laws? Or maybe we just need to change the system, right? Oppressing so many people going through hard times, and maybe we should consider a new system in which life would be at the center of things and just stop with all this regulation which makes things more complicated and saves the people who's already saved. Yes, so there's also this vision of legislation which could not be so useful in this point in which technology is progressing so fast. So it's not just about the small type and the legislation, but also whether this legislation is going to be able to regulate things we have not yet thought about, even. Not just what Jared was saying in the beginning, like mind reading and so on, but things that go beyond that, even. So in a few minutes, we're going to give you the floor so that you can ask questions. But before that, I'm going to ask our panelists for a quick intervention, a quick word on some of the aspects we've dealt with. Just 1 minute, everyone.
I would agree fully. I mean, my presumption, even though I am an international human rights lawyer, and as the joke goes, if you're a hammer, everything you see is a nail, I don't necessarily believe we need new human rights. I think what we need to do for all of these kinds of areas of technology is to first look at what would already be protected with existing law. Second, what existing laws might need to be slightly expanded and how it's interpreted to cover new problems. And after having done those two first things, we can see what's left, right? And is there a gap left that needs to be filled? So when I talked about 5 neuro rights, I'm not saying we should just create out of whole cloth a treaty on neuro rights and these are the 5 rights that there should be there. For example, the right to mental privacy is a subset of a broader right to privacy, right? And I believe can be created by further interpreting the right to privacy that already exists under international law and national legal and regulatory frameworks. So I think in a lot of cases, we're not talking about new laws, we're talking about, or new rights, We're talking about adopting or adapting the existing framework we have internationally and nationally to meet the new challenges that weren't thought of when these existing human rights or national laws were developed.
More laws, new laws.
Okay. You see this thing?
Briefly, go ahead.
It's a scarf. And when an African woman removes the scarf and ties it around her waist, it means she's ready to fight. We need new laws. We need new laws because the existing laws are made by those in power to keep in power. The existing laws are still going on with inequalities. I told you, access to the internet is not yet a right. We have been pushing for it, it's not there. If you don't have it as a fundamental human right, you may not be able to add it into your constitution. And that is what allows Iran to cut off the internet. That is what allows Zimbabwe to cut off the internet. That is what allows Nigeria to shut down platforms. Do you get what I mean? If we don't have it in our constitution that the access to the internet is a right, we will not give it the needed priority. You see what I mean? So for us to close inequalities, for us to make sure that our women are protected, we need new laws. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ana, estamos basculando de...
I agree fully with that. This is what I just said. When there are gaps that exist that need to be filled, we need new laws. But we shouldn't just assume that, that we need new laws for everything. There are a lot of things that are covered. Of course, access to the internet, I fully agree with you, is a right that we need to create, which does not yet currently exist.
Para que quede constante.
Just I would like to note that I didn't organize the words of the speakers so that we would have the ones pro more laws and the ones against more laws. I didn't know about that. Anyway, what do you have to say about these proposals? Well, I fully agree with Nnenna that we need to, tie our scarf around our waist and fight because hard times are coming in the physical world and the digital world. So we need to tie our scarf around our waist. I didn't say I don't want laws. I just want better laws. What I don't want new rights, because we already have rights and we're not complying with them. We're not enforcing them. But I don't want to regulate the access to technology. I want to regulate the problem for any technology, and they should be kind of a great charter that will last 100 years. We cannot change laws every other day. And when we design these laws, we have to think about the whole planet, not just us. For instance, now there are 20 active wars in the world, people dying in 20 different places, and we just talk about one area. We should look at all the world at once without our Western bias, without a colonial view, and without testing things we shouldn't be testing in developing countries and then earn money in developed countries. Thank you very much, Ricardo. And Anna, Nnenna, Jared. So with laws or without them, we are debating, we are discussing this, which is fundamental to eventually have a regulation which hopefully will be as good as possible to enforce rights and to guarantee rights. So I will now give our audience the floor because we also want to hear from you. We want you to give us some food for thought as well. So it's up to you now. We will have around 15 minutes for Q&A, and we'll see what comes out of that. So we've got a hand raised over there. So please wait for the mic. Technology, we need it. Thank you. So you're talking about the right to access the internet, for instance, but then phones are not given, smartphones are not given for free. In order to be operational in many spheres of life, you need increasingly more phone apps, for instance, and I wonder how should this access be when we know this is not a cheap process? It is an expensive one, actually. So that's what I wonder. So anyone? Well, the purpose of the World Wide Web when it was created was to have a single place with all the apps in it. Unfortunately, the market has split it up in apps because from a business model perspective, it's better for you to have an app for each one of the tasks you want to accomplish. But the truth is that in the 90s, we got to put everything together in the World Wide Web, and then in the 21st century, we began splitting it up again. And this is not design error. It was the market who did it. And it's difficult to revert that because it would be like changing things that already exist, and we cannot change them really because of the market we've got. So
quick one. When you have the data about global connectivity, it comes from the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. The data that you have today that says 52% of the global population is connected, that connectivity actually means someone connecting to the internet once every 3 months. That's the data that you have. So we're being told that half of the population of the world connects to the internet at least once every 3 months. Do you think that is a fair basis? No. There is something called meaningful connectivity. It means 4 things: that you are able to connect every day, at least once a day, that you are able to have a good device, a smart device, that you have unlimited broadband internet, and that you have speed that is at least 4G. So if someone connects to the internet once a week, that actually is not meaningful connectivity. Now, there is something else called meaningful access that we are pushing at the level of ITU, because you can have all of this and you don't have the capacity to do anything out of it. So training people and making the devices affordable is all part of meaningful access. So it is not just enough to have Wi-Fi. No. And I'm saying this, if someone from the city of Barcelona is here, please listen. What governments do is to say, we have Wi-Fi, we have them in schools. It is not enough. People must have the power to use that to solve their problems. You see what I mean? So meaningful access is very important in internet access.
That's great. But, Nnenna, before I give the word a estas personas que quieren preguntar,
So before giving the floor to these other people,
cars, before we actually embrace mobiles everyone, because it seems like it might not be sustainable. But let's perhaps talk about that. Más preguntas, por favor.
Yo lo que quiero decir,
some more questions? Yes, I would like to say that when it comes to pay, for instance, for the elderly or disabled people or vulnerable people in other countries, you know, when you have to go to the bank, for instance, you don't have preferential access, you don't have anyone catering for you, you know, daily life stuff is being automatized, and again, disabled people or the elderly cannot pay with their mobile phones, for instance, so that's not about human rights anymore. Yes, I agree with that. It's called the digitalization of bureaucracy, right? And basically it saves companies a lot of money, not having people doing the front-end work, the red tape and so on. They save a lot of money, so that's the grounds. But of course they forget about people for which using a smartphone is not as easy as for other generations. And also, answering the first question, I believe that something we could do would be to claim your right to paper, you know, bureaucracy on paper.
I understand that Nnenna is addressing principally the access to internet and the rights around accessing, and I understood that Jared was speaking about how are we going to prevent 1984 of George Orwell with the examples he gave, and obviously if my mother needs an advice in order to be able to speak, I would be so happy about it, but I would not like that my children are 1984 processed.
Muchas gracias. Como veis, no solo es una cuestión.
Thank you so much. As you can see, it's not just about access, but about the digital environment. So we've got some hands raised. We like that. Ricardo?
In order to strengthen Anna's ideas, it's not only cheaper, they sell it like being more modern, but this increases inequalities amongst people. Just let me tell you. Yes, do we have the mic? Okay, great. It's very difficult to ask questions because it's quite a broad topic, but I do have the feeling that everything has to do with a technology revolution. A revolution, digitalization, the internet, the web. It's a technology revolution that is changing the world, the way we create new politics and we make politics, and it's really complicating my life. It's complicating my life. I do not have a smartphone. I'm a privileged. I'm the posh one. I like to be rich. I'm posh. I'm happy to be without the internet. But I don't like if I have to go to the airport to have the smartphone to make something very simple, such as my check-in. What an absurdity. It happened to me. And fortunate enough, there was someone that was very sympathetic with me, and this has to do with the previous conference with the idea of solidarity. He was very, well, friendly, and he helped me. And this is real, and this is not digital. So how can we work against this? Because the internet that I'm using, it's only for big corporates. Everything is controlled by private companies. It's not a public space. So we are talking about fighting for human rights. We are talking about standardizing everything. But the web, it's a private thing. I don't feel myself identified with the World Wide Web. And if I want to develop a project, and this is my last comment, I have to be always in social media and social networks that are always determined and controlled by private interests. I don't want to depend on that. How can we change this? I think that there was another comment at the back, and then here in this front row, and two more. We don't have time. Maybe 6 questions, but very, very short questions. I'm going to try it. I'm from Russia. And Russia, as a state, is violating a lot the privacy, people's privacy and the right of not being connected. So the observation systems in Moscow, the cameras, they recorded the people in demonstrations, and after some days they recognized the faces and went to people's homes and they arrested. And now they are, you know that they have to go to the war, and people that are in public transportation, they are detected and they arrested, and they grab young men for send them to the war. So this is an abuse of the systems, of digital systems, and of this interconnected society, because the government, instead of cutting the internet as in other countries, they do the opposite. They use a lot the internet. The government uses a lot the government and these kind of systems to reinforce the power that the government has. I have 2 questions. Well, is there any context or case that will justify this kind of abuses from a public institution or from the side of a corporation such as Facebook and Google that are surveilling all the time what we do? And the other question would be, can we prevent this kind of abuses in a specific manner? Do we have any systems to avoid this? Well, we have time for 2 questions more, and we'll give you some answers. At least a few answers. Yes, please go ahead. Yes. I'd like to comment on something, but also I'd like to ask a question. You talked about, technology revolution, but I do believe that in parallel with this idea of revolution, there is a change, a systemic change. With this regard, and thinking about the concept of being human, human being, it comes from the Enlightenment, the colonialism, and many other systems that we created from Europe. Is there any possibility to think in something that wouldn't be human, that will make us to be closer to the nature and to create a new relationship between technology and nature, because we cannot escape from technology today? Yes, this subject is quite interesting. The last question, please, and very short question to give the floor to our dear panel. We won't have time. Otherwise, we won't have time to take all the questions, because otherwise we won't have a final idea from the members of the panel. Thank you. Yes, it is a question mainly for Nnenna. Hey, we all dream to have less corporate web, and I think that there are two efforts: the Web 3, the decentralized web, and 3.0 web, which is the semantics web, the one that is promoted by Tim Berners-Lee. When we deal with digital rights and how we must respect the spirit of the internet, how do you see these two proposals? Okay, great. So the floor is yours. Who dares to answer? Anna. Okay, I'd like to answer to your question, the question that we will be able to think about decolonialism technology, and I'd like to recommend you an indigenous activist from Mexico, Josnana Elena Gil. She talks about the ecology, technology and ecology. It's a very interesting concept. It was created by different indigenous communities from Mexico, and she said that we had to escape from the past of the technology because it's very patriarchal and very colonial, and mainly in Mexican communities they developed a new OS. It's not Windows, do not use English or Spanish, they use indigenous languages. So there are alternatives, yes, and we have other alternatives to Google Maps, such as open source software. Yes, we have alternatives. Yes, Ricardo? Let me just answer to this same question. In Ubuntu, South of Africa, an individual is an individual thanks to other individuals. That's the world I dream. Think about the group, human beings. We were born in tribes, around 150 people, and we created relationships in this very closed framework of people, 150 to 100 people. This is the future. To go back again to this concept of future and not think only in ourselves and how to be richer. It's very difficult to answer to your question. What can we do? If there are loads of people like you with this mindset, well, you should be an entrepreneur to offer what you really want, because I will be your consumer and your client. Jared, Nnenna?
I live on the internet. I can be here. If you want, we can be here till midnight. I'm ready. But we have to go. Gentlemen, the web and the internet are still open. You can quote me. Were it not for the open, free internet, you wouldn't be having content in Spanish. It would be only in English. And you have to pay a license if you wanted to translate any page.
Yeah, but the web is free, not the internet.
No. Access to the internet can be paid.
Yeah.
I'm coming. I teach internet governance. In my other life, I'm a lecturer. I also teach internet governance. There is something called the layers of the internet. You talked about the content layer, right? There is the infrastructure layer. There are quite a number of layers, the policy layer and all of that. In my job, I deal with the United Nations and the United Nations member states, including Russia, China, all of these countries. If you know what is happening behind, it's called fragmentation. Every country wishes that they will own the internet. If there was a way that one country will own the internet, they would have done it long ago. If there was a way that one commercial company will own the internet, they would have done it long ago. So the fact that if you are not on Twitter, you can go on Facebook is still something good. The fact that you can go on TikTok and not go somewhere else is still because there are people fighting so that the IP and the domain name can still be resolved. So, folks, my job is not easy. I can tell you that states are struggling to own the internet, but we have not given up. The architecture of the internet is still decentralized. Now, where we are is something called attention economy, where Meta wants you to be in Meta alone, and Google wants you to be in Google alone, and TikTok wants you to spend all your life in TikTok. And so my last word to every one of you, stand up for the internet. Ensure that you don't tie your hands to one platform. You were born free, and you were born equal to any other person. Ensure that you do your part to maintain that freedom and that equality. That is your personal job. Thank you.
Gracias, Nnenna. Jared, ¿tienes alguna...
Jared, do you have any answer to some of the questions that were made here? There were a few questions towards you, I think, that had to do with your intervention.
Yeah, well, let me just mention what's happening in Russia, Ukraine, and in conflict zones around the world where dictators seek to control all of these corporate platforms like Facebook or Twitter or TikTok, et cetera, to control the narrative. And the question was asked, is this violating people's rights? The answer is absolutely yes. You have a right under international law to freedom of opinion and expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of political participation. And when Russia, as the description went, is using technology to scan crowds, identify people, and then go arrest them later, that clearly violates people's rights. And the question is, what responsibility also does platforms like Facebook or Twitter or TikTok that cooperate with dictatorships, what responsibilities do they have for the violation of people's rights, and how do you hold them accountable? And there have been a number of small examples, and it's very difficult to do, of holding accountable large companies if, for example, they give away the IP addresses of people who have made certain posts on the internet that then result in a person being arrested and detained. This has happened on many occasions, and it's going to happen a lot more. And companies like Facebook or Twitter or others say, well, we're just complying with the local laws. Mm-hmm. Well, the local laws violate international law, and so that is not an excuse in the 21st century to simply be a facilitator of the commission of mass atrocity crimes, which has happened in a number of contexts, most especially in China, as it relates to the mass surveillance of the Uyghur population, for example, in East Turkestan. So this is an ongoing fight to close the gap between the commitment of states to human rights and their enforcement in practice. And we definitely need to hold all of the corporate actors on the internet and on the World Wide Web accountable when they are not just being simply neutral arbiters of the transmission of information, but when they're complicit in and in fact responsible for people who are getting in the real world arrested, tortured, detained, etc.
Thank you so much, Jared. Well, we'll be for quite a while, till midnight here, talking about many other topics. We don't have many time. Thank you very much for your kind questions. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you for being with us here, to listen to us, very attentive, willing to intervene. I'm sorry because we were not able to offer you the answers, but we didn't have more time for questions. But just let me tell you that we don't have to wait for new laws. Each and every one of us, we can make things happen, to be listened, to discuss and to deliberate about these topics, and also we have the right, individual right, to make some pressure towards a better future where we'll be listened not only to those that are at power, but also that those that are oppressed by and through these technologies that are advancing in a very fast manner. Thank you very much to all of you, and many thank you very much to our members such as Jared, Nnenna, Anna, and Ricardo. Thank you so much. A very big applause to them and to you all. Thank you. Thank you very much to the 4 members of the panel and the moderators, Albert, Sabater, and Coll. It was not an easy task. Loads of people, loads of speakers. Well, with any further, I just like to see you again tomorrow here. We'll be at 5 p.m. once again to talk about love technology and cures, and we will have a live podcast. If you are not interested in these topics, tomorrow it is the last day of this biennial of thought, and we'll have other squares and spaces. So please have a look to the program. And so we invite you to look biennial program in our website or in paper, because we have it in paper as well. So that's all. Thank you very much. Have a great evening. See you tomorrow.